People sometimes say you gotta have a goal,
Mm-hmm.
set the right habits into place,
Mm-hmm.
and then detach yourself from the goal. It'll come when it comes.
Yes.
But then at the same time, it's like you always have your eye on the goal at all times.
Yes.
So these to me sound like conflicting concepts.
Yes, that makes sense. All of those things are true. You are looking for how does it make sense? When someone says keep your eye on the prize, of course they don't mean that literally. When someone says detach yourself from the goal, they don't mean that literally. So if someone is saying to you, keep your eye on the prize, keep your head down and work, that's misleading, I understand. So let's reframe it. Because the concept of your head being down to work is one that I don't necessarily care for. I understand what it means, but I think it's confusing. And I also think that it doesn't send the right. It sends a message that's important, which is block out all distractions. That's the concept of keeping your head down, focusing on one thing. But that's not how life actually happens, right? Because to keep your head down also sends the connotation that you're not necessarily taking pride in what you're doing. So you can keep your head up and work. Keep your eye on the prize again doesn't mean all of this is used in context. So it doesn't necessarily mean literally if you're focusing on something, some process in order to actually get to the goal. But if your eye is not on the prize, you stare in the direction of whatever it is that you're doing. Often there's an analogy with like driving for like performance drivers, the ones who know how to pretty much manipulate the movement of the car really well in very tight spaces, kind of like drifting. They look at the direction that they're interested in going because whatever you look at, your body is geared to move toward that direction. So essentially, keep your eye on the prize and creating the habits to align yourself with whatever the prize is the same thing. That's the same statement, really. It's just a reframe for context. As far as putting your head down and working, I'm not in favor of that concept. I believe that you should keep your head up and work. I think that you should be focused on what you're doing. You should take pride in what you're doing. And you should see all distractions, but not allow them to distract you because that's life. Life is going to throw distractions at you despite how disciplined you may be at alleviating them from your life. So of course, the best way to exercise willpower is to put yourself in a position where you don't have to use it. But there are instances where you will have to use it, despite your intention. And real discipline is not eliminating distractions. Discipline is being able to move throughout the world, seeing the distractions, but not allowing yourself to be distracted by the distractions. That's real discipline. That's real self-control. That's real willpower. So essentially, set the habits up that align with whatever your goal is. Be conscious of what your goal is, or keep your eye on the prize so that you can do that accordingly. Be mindful of the distractions, but walk in discipline so that you can actually achieve your goal.
So where does detachment come into place?
Detaching yourself from your goal or detaching yourself from the outcome means once you have created the habits that align you with the goal, focus more on the process than the actual goal. What happens when people focus on the goal is they lose sight of the beauty of the process. Because the whole concept of focusing on a goal is just focusing on the end game. When the end game is not really the prize. You are the prize. But you don't become who you can be until you go throughout the process. So that's the gem, usually, in the story of you pursuing whatever goal you may have.
For me, it's hard to say keep the habits, make sure you got the right habits in mind, and then detach from the goal when perhaps your habits might not move the needle. So I think that's also, again, like that's a danger with that concept of detaching from the goal. With people might interpret that as like, all right, I got the habits in place, now we good. You got the discipline, now we good. But it might leave people blindsided.
Then you actually don't have the habits in place. Detaching from the goal, it means don't focus on the goal. Don't only look at the goal and not align yourself with actually achieving the goal. And don't put a time limit on the goal. Unless you can. There's some aspects or some accomplishments in life where you can put a time limit on. like graduating college. You can put a time limit on that. Can't necessarily put a time limit on when you're going to make your first million. You don't know when that's going to happen. You know how much work you can put in. You can control how much effort you put in. But you don't know when you're going to actually hit that target because things happen. So instead of focusing on creating a time frame for when you're going to hit that target or a specific deadline, a date as to when you're going to hit that target, focus on actually doing the things that make hitting that target possible. And if you're not doing the things that make hitting that target possible, you're not focused on the goal because you're not aligned with it. If you're not aligned with the goal, you're not focused on the goal. You may have a goal, but you're not focused on it. So it's more like a dream, not a goal. Or in some situations, if this is what you need, you have to course correct. You think that you're aligned with it. And in the process of doing it, you find that this is actually pushing you further away from the goal. So you have to pivot, change your plan. But again, keeping your eye on the process, pretty much focusing on the process and detaching yourself from the goal, those are not literal statements. Those are statements in context. Focus on the process, trust the process. That's where you become the person that you need to be. The goal is great, really just, it's how you keep score, but that's not where the focus should be. The focus should be on the process, but you don't have a process without a goal. This is why you hear both of these statements being thrown around simultaneously, but based on the context of the conversation, you'll hear one being used more than the other. But they're not to be taken literally, where it's like I'm really literally looking at the goal so I don't see what's happening in front of me. That's not really what that means.
Do you think it's any value in already knowing your why or like your purpose as a child?
Absolutely. Extreme value in knowing your purpose as a child, knowing your why as a young child, for sure. Look at Beyonce. She knew what she wanted to do since she was a child, supposedly since she was like 4 years old. And look at her life. You have way more of a runway. The sooner you know your why, you have so much more runway. Beyonce has had nearly 40 years of focus, extreme levels of discipline. The amount of effort that she puts in is next level. It makes sense why she's as successful as she is in the realm of music. Same thing with Michael Jackson. Hit records, 5, 6 years old, 7. That's different.
But how do we know that was really their purpose or that's what they were put on by their elders?
Because someone introduces you to something doesn't mean you have to stick with it. Your elders could say, hey, this is a good idea, or force you to do it as a child. But as a grown person, you don't have to continue to do that. If this is something that doesn't speak to you, it doesn't speak to you. So that's the first thing. So that's the same concept with someone being 5 years old and becoming a performer because their parent forced them to be a performer and continuing to be a performer until they were in their latter 40s, early 50s, because then it's not force. Even if we say, okay, as a child, you were forced to do this. As an adult, you weren't. And there's plenty of child stars that were huge when they were children, and we haven't heard from them in years. Macaulay Culkin. No. If you're doing that for decades on end, chances are that's you making the decision. Is it really who you are? Maybe not. Maybe it's a persona that you feel trapped by. And so now you have to constantly present yourself as this alias because the persona is so much larger than life. Let's say, for example, if Michael Jackson was faking it, Michael Jackson was so huge that if that wasn't who he really was, maybe he would have felt like he still had to do it because there was really no way out of it. Michael Jackson deciding that he didn't want to be a singer anymore was not going to change the fact that everybody in the world knew him. So it'd be hard to back out of that. So that is a possibility.